John had been working hard all day and was looking forward to a quiet evening in front of the TV. The constant rain and thunder outside only added to the dreariness of the night. But just as he was getting comfortable on the couch, the sound of the doorbell jolted him awake. He was taken aback, as he was the only one left at home. The rest of his family had gone on a much-needed vacation, but he had stayed behind due to a recent illness. The last thing he expected was to have an unexpected visitor on such a dark and stormy night. Rising from the couch, he made his way to the window and peered out into the darkness, his gaze settling on the figure of a stranger that was standing out in the rain. He suspected that the man had come for help, or that something had gone wrong and he needed assistance. Making his way down the stairs, John slowly opened the door, his expression hesitant as he asked the man what he wanted. And then he noticed the man standing in front of him, and something seemed off. Every detail of the stranger's appearance registered in his mind, causing a prickle of unease to course through his veins. He furrowed his brow, suddenly aware that he was in the presence of a potentially dangerous individual. The stranger was an imposing figure, with a large, muscular frame and dark eyes that seemed to pierce the man's soul. He had a cruel grin on his face. As John stood there, he gradually became aware that the man's clothing was spattered with blood, and the stranger was holding a huge knife. In a sudden moment of horror, he realized that opening this door had been his greatest mistake. Despite the man's best efforts to close the door and get help, the stranger was too fast. The stranger violently forced his way through the door, launching a brutal attack on the man, causing him to stumble and fall, his head slamming against the wall several meters away. The stranger continued to advance towards him, making it clear that he was not to be trifled with. The man lay on the floor with a fresh and deep wound on his shoulder, his body weak and powerless. After a moment of stillness, John comes to the realization that he must flee if he wants to stay alive. Despite his daze, he finds the strength to stand, and at the last second, he evades the intruder's second strike by sprinting up the stairs. John sprinted to the bedroom, slamming the door shut and engaging the lock. But it wasn't long before he heard a forceful thud, followed by the sight of a knife blade slowly slicing through the door and widening the hole. "How is this monster so strong?" he thought to himself in disbelief. He realized the door was no match for the intruder, and it was only a matter of time before he'd have to confront the assailant. Suddenly, the banging stopped, and John heard the stranger's menacing voice for the first time. "Open the door! I'm starving!" the stranger growled, and burst into an inhuman laugh. Upon hearing the intruder's voice, John was struck with terror. It dawned on him that the attacker's intentions were not just to harm him, but to feast on him as well. He feels trapped and helpless, with no one to turn to for help. He tries to come up with a plan to defend himself, but he's unsure if he will be able to withstand the intruder's strength. He begins to look around the room for anything he can use as a weapon, but he finds nothing. His heart racing, John takes a deep breath and tries to remain calm. He knows that the situation is dire, and he must act quickly to ensure his survival. With no other options available, he prepares himself for the inevitable confrontation with the stranger, unsure of what the outcome will be. Despite his desperate attempts to defend himself, John's punches proved to be ineffective against the relentless attacker. As the intruder closed in, John could see the glint of a knife in his hand, and with a brutal force, the attacker repeatedly plunged the blade into John's chest and stomach. The man screamed in pain, struggling to break free from the stranger's grasp, but it was no use. As his life began to fade away, he watched in horror as the stranger continued to stabbing him to death. When it was all over, the man's lifeless body lay on the ground, with nothing but a pool of blood. After the attack, the psychopath grinned and started to dismember his victim for easier transport. He then left the house with the remains in a black plastic bag and vanished into the night. The mysterious stranger had arrived at the house on that fateful night, and he had vanished as quickly as he had come. The chill that seemed to linger in the air was a reminder of the gruesome act that had occurred that evening. Nobody knew who he was or why he had come, and no one in the victim's family wanted to stay in the house, for fear of their own lives. The police searched for the stranger. After a 2-year investigation, the criminal was identified as a cannibal. In his home, the remains of 4 missing people were discovered, who he had murdered and then taken to his secret location to consume. The gruesome act that had occurred left a deep scar on the neighbors, and the house became a place of fear and dread. Nobody wanted to come near it, as if it were cursed. To many, it was a reminder of the cruel and unusual ways that some people can act.